Good morning, it's Friday and welcome to Sabba's Way of Life. So I'm going to go straight in and get on to part 3 of talking about cancer, the disease cancer, but I'm speaking about it in a metaphoric way and philosophical, but definitely the universal, which is the mystical, and how cancer in our body is a reflection of what is happening in the world at large. So I'm just going to continue. I'm reading this book that I've mentioned in the last 2 readings, The Healing Power of Illness. I've given you the background of the authors. I've also explained how it came to be in my hands, and how this is important from a metaphoric and esoteric perspective, and how it's so relevant to what's happening today. You have to bear in mind that the authors wrote this book, I think it was in the late 80s. They're not young. One of them has already died. He died in his 70s. So they would have been born in the 40s and 50s. So that's where their insight is coming from. Right, I would suggest you go back to those other 2 videos to get more information and details on the authors and the authors' minds, and of course do your own research. This is what my channel is all about, doing your own research. So in Cancer 2, I talked about the understanding of the whole, and I gave an analogy, the author gave an analogy of the woods, and how the tree is part of a wood and how the wood is part of a countryside. And then I explained how this works with humanity, how humans are part of humanity, and how the organs within our body are part of the human, and how the cells are part of the organ, and it's all part of the whole. So nothing is in isolation. Completely opposite to the way we have been taught to understand medicine, the allopathic way of medicine, which is a very reductionist point of view, breaking everything down into its smallest pieces and then specializing in one area. It's the polar opposite of that, which I put it to you, is that the truth comes from the whole, and disease stems from thinking of everything in a reductionist manner. And this stems to every part of our life, as in thinking about me, myself and I is a reductionist view, which the state as a whole and the system that we live in has promoted. And I would argue that that has been done by design. In fact, I don't even know why I say I would argue. I know it has been done by design so that it separates us from who we really are, which are very, very powerful beings. We are part of a whole. Humanity is one whole. I'm going to move on now in this book. So the last part was about the humanity. And what I'm going to do now is just read a section where the author talks about politics. And this is important before I go on then in the next talk to explain how today's politics, the world state, it reflects what cancer is in the body. It's exactly the same, and it's important you understand it, because that's the whole point of cancer when it's seen from this different lens and this perspective. It's very powerful. So just going back to what I had briefly read last time, I had explained that what the author said was that each of us is part of humanity, and he explained that each complex organism, humanity, the state, the organ, has its functioning ordered in such a way that, as far as possible, all its parts, every little bit of it, defer to the one common idea and then work on its behalf. So it's all working as a whole. Each individual part of the organ and humanity and organism has its own unique job to do, but it understands it is part of a bigger whole. Okay? Now, each system can normally cope with the failure of a few of its constituent parts without any danger to the whole. So what that is saying, for those of you who need a little bit more explanation, is that if one part fails, so let's say, for example, you are studying music and you're a great musician and it's all working beautifully because you understand how to sing, you understand how to play instruments, you understand how to write music, you understand the notes, you understand the rhythms, but you might be a little bit shaky on one part of it. Maybe there's one particular sound you can't get quite right. It doesn't mean, therefore, you can't become a good musician. It won't affect it. It doesn't put the whole of your career, musical career, at risk for that one small error. You can work on that. Yeah. What he says is that yet there is a limit beyond which the very existence of the whole is put at risk. Now he's going to talk about the state. The state is the people, the state that governs our world. You know, it's kind of a one world now. For those of you who don't, you need to go back and do the research, but we are living in a one world system, organization. So that's a fact. That's a fact. So it says here, thus, when you think of the organism as a state, right, a state can cope with some of its citizens refusing to work, behaving antisocially, or setting themselves up against the state. If, however, this group of refuseniks, he calls it, you could call them dissidents or divergents, if this group of refuseniks increases in numbers, it can eventually reach a size where it starts to become a serious danger to the whole. Indeed, should it turn into a majority, it can threaten the whole's continued existence. Now, I hope those of you who are understanding this analogy or metaphor are twigging what I'm saying. And even if a few of you do, it's enough, because that will expand your mind in ways you will not believe, or it will just confirm things that you already knew. So naturally, the state will devote much time, so the system, the state, or the organism, the entire body, will devote much time to trying to protect itself against this development and fighting for its own existence. But should it fail in the attempt, its collapse is inevitable. So this state, this organism, will do everything it can to fight to keep itself as a whole, whatever this organism is. But what it's saying here, that if it fails, then it will collapse entirely because of that group of divergents or dissidents that are growing in number. This applies to everything. I'm not talking about good or bad. I'm not suggesting dissidents are good or bad. I'm not suggesting the organism is good or bad. I'm just, what the author is explaining to you is how this system works. Remember not to immediately think, oh yes, I know what this is all about. No, just accept what I'm saying on how the mechanism behind this system works. The most promising available approach would be to bring the dissidents back into the fold in good time, while they are still at the small group stage, by offering them attractive opportunities to cooperate in working towards the common goal. In the long run, though, the method usually applied by the state is violently to suppress or eradicate the disaffected elements, and this is hardly ever successful. Do you follow what I'm saying? So you want to bring those people that refuse to comply back into line by, what they're saying is, by sweetening them in some kind of way, or you can use violence to suppress or eradicate them completely. However, it's very rarely successful, because this reaction is more likely to lead to chaos. From the state's point of view, the forces of opposition are dangerous enemies whose sole aim is to destroy the good old order and spread chaos abroad. So spread chaos throughout the entire system, or the organism, or the wood, or the countryside, or the world. I really like you to soak this in and think about what I'm saying here. It's a huge, massive metaphor. This way of looking at things is perfectly justified, of course, though only from one particular viewpoint. Were we to ask those rebelling against the established order for their opinions, we should hear other arguments that would be equally justified from their point of view, that is. Obviously, though, they would not be identifying themselves with the state's aims and ideas, but setting up in opposition to them views and interests of their own, which they would be keen to see put into effect. What the state wants is obedience. What such groups want, by contrast, is freedom to realise their own ideas. We can well understand both sides, but it is not easy to realise both sets of interests at once without making certain sacrifices. This should all be making sense to you. Now, the author goes on to say, in no way is it the purpose of these few lines to develop any kind of political or social theory or creed. Rather, it is to represent what happens in cancer in a very different context, so as to broaden somewhat people's normally extremely blinkered view of the disease. Now, I'm going to stop there, because then when I conduct my next conversation or talk about this, we're going to talk more about how, what this analogy that the author has just stated here on the state and the fight between the state and the dissidents, how it mirrors, or cancer is an absolute mirror of this. And then you can then draw a parallel to the increase in physical cancer disease in the body worldwide. You can draw a parallel between that and what's happening in our world today. The two go hand in hand. It is also interesting, once again, I want to repeat that this particular book has to be read not just from a literal standpoint, but also from a metaphorical and universal standpoint. Because when you start thinking in that way, you are able to bring about the truth of any situation, the more likely and the more probable truth of any situation, when you can start thinking not just from your left brain, which is your mainstream logic and reasoning, but from your right brain, which offers a much more deeper, it's an insight, pictures, metaphors, the mystical side of who you are, the source connection, the connection to the universal mind, the connection to God. I'll put some more notes down below. Otherwise, have a lovely Friday and speak to you tomorrow.